Well, hey guys. I thought I would pop on because you're all hanging out here. So here's what's going on. I think that we've had a time zone confusion, which I totally understand because I suck at time zones worse than anyone in the world. We are in different time zones, and I think I'm trying to reach out to her to get her on the stream, and I'm just not getting a response. So I think we may have had some time zone confusion. So don't worry, we will reschedule the stream if we need to, but I know a whole bunch of you are waiting. And I do apologize. I mean, if it doesn't work out for today, I will get her back another time. Just one of those things that happens sometimes. I did want to thank George here. Carlin, here is some support for your troubles. Looking forward to the occasion this stream can actually happen. Keep up the good fight. Well, I don't know. I'm going to kind of give her maybe another minute here. I've been pinging her. I've asked Nico to ping her. But in the meantime, do you guys want to see some information about Ibram X. Kendi being a transphobe? Does everyone want to talk about how Ibram X. Kendi is a transphobe for a second? Because, guys, this is like the best thing that's ever happened. So we may not be able to have Theora right now, but we can talk about the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist being a transphobe. So, okay, this just came out on Twitter. Let me get this shared. You guys are saying yes, God, yes. I agree. Okay, Chrome tab. This is the one I'm looking for. Share audio. Okay. Here is a thing that just came out on Twitter today. Exclusive clip. January 25th, 2021, Ibram X. Kendi openly discussed how horrifying it would be if his daughter were trans and how society must protect children from gender ideas coming from the trans community. Let's hear what he had to say.
Obviously talking about race, even talking about gender. I think it was last week, my daughter came home and said she wanted to be a boy, which was horrifying for my wife to hear, myself to hear. And so, of course, we're like, okay, what affirmative messages about girlhood, can we be teaching her to protect her from whatever she's hearing in our home or even outside of our home that would make her want to be a boy. And I suspect it's the same thing with, kids of color, in which they're regularly hearing these messages that maybe may want them to want to be white, or even white children who are like, I'm happy I'm white, right? What affirmative messages are we teaching them to break down those ideas?
So we may not have Fiorella right now, but we do have Ibram X. Kendi admitting to being a transphobe, which I think is almost just as good, because this means that he is going to get I hope a metric F ton of crap. And if he doesn't, then they have just shown their true colors. All right, guys, I'm just gonna hang out probably for a couple more minutes here. I'm gonna give her until 3:30, and if I don't hear from anything by 3:30, I'm gonna call it a day. And again, I'm sorry. I think for those of you who just joined, in anticipation that we were gonna have our conversation, I think that we've had some time zone confusion. I am the worst with time zones in the world, so I completely understand if this happens. But what it looks like happened to me is that she popped into the stream about an hour before we were actually scheduled to go live, and I didn't see it because I was in a meeting. But I've been trying to ping her to try to make it happen for today, and I just haven't heard anything back. So I suspect it's just time zone confusion, and I promise you that that I will make it work sometime in the future. And I apologize that it is not going well today, but I do hope that you guys are ready for the weekend. And I don't know. Do you guys have any questions or anything? Anything you want to chat about while we're kind of hanging out? I'm going to give it about 5 more minutes and then I'm calling it a day. So Plastic Ocean asks, why is Ibram X. Kendi a transphobe? He is a transphobe because He has a transfer. Oh, hang on. Let me share the screen again. I'll show it to you. Share screen. I'm not going to play the clip again, but there is this clip that's just come out of this training that he did, in which he, what's it say? Ibram X. Kendi openly discusses how horrifying it must be if his daughter were trans. On January 25th, 2021, Ibram X. Kendi gave a special Zoom interview hosted by the New York State Association for Independent Schools. In the talk, he explained his views on transgender identity, namely that transgenderism is horrifying and that society should break down such ideas in order to protect girls. Essentially, his daughter apparently came home and was telling him how she wanted to be a boy, and he instantly went into like, "Ooh, we have to reinforce that it's okay to be a girl," which of course is fine. Like, dude, that's normal, but not in the land of Ibram X. Kendi, in the land of anti-racism. Oh, you guys are asking about the Times article. So I haven't actually fully read the Times article yet. You guys, maybe we can do that live. Hang on, I got a couple super chats. Joshua Sanders says, "How are you doing?" I'm chill, man. I'm okay. I'm having a rough time lately for many reasons. But I'm good. I'm a tough cookie, and I promise you I'm not going to go anywhere. George says, "Always confirm what time zones you're referring to when you're making appointments in different time zones." Yeah, we did. I did. But sometimes time zones suck. Sometimes time zones are hard. Okay, do you guys want to read the Times article together? Because I'm more than willing to do that. Hang on, I just gotta find it. I gotta find it real quick. I know exactly where to look for it. I'm just gonna knock my screen up for a second. Let's read that Times article. For those of you who are just joining, um, sadly, I don't have my reasonable lefty here because I think we've had some time zone confusion, so I'm just making it up as I go along. And what we're gonna do is we're going to read the Times article together. Okay. Or the Time article, not Times. Ooh, you guys can tell I've been shopping for yarn with the retargeting. All right, let's read this. Yeah, I mean, I've heard about this article. This article is apparently where they are blatantly bragging about all the stuff they did to rig the election. And maybe Farrell will show up. Yes, exactly. We have to think positively. Maybe she'll show up as we're doing it. But guys, if it doesn't happen, like I'll just reschedule it. It's not that big of a deal. But let's read this article together and see what they had to say. A weird thing happened right after the November 3rd election. Nothing. The nation was braced for chaos. Liberal groups had vowed to take to the streets, planning hundreds of protests around the country. Right-wing militias were girding for the battle. No, they weren't. Not really. That's a lie. In a poll before Election Day, 75% of Americans voiced concern about violence. Yes, because everyone thought that Donald Trump would win. And if Trump was currently president today, let's just say that, we all know exactly what would have happened. Antifa and Black Lives Matter would have rioted and burned down a bunch of crap. We all know exactly what would have happened. Instead, because they all thought Joe Biden won, an eerie quiet descended as President Trump refused to concede. The response was not mass riots, but crickets. Do you guys notice how the left is always surprised at the fact that like the right doesn't do this stuff? I mean, they're going to point to January 6th forever. This will forever be the thing that they point to, along with Charlottesville, of course. But the right doesn't do this stuff. That just doesn't make any sense, but they don't understand that. Like, these people are crazy. They actually believe that the right are always these violent, like, extremists. Um, yeah, cats plus yarn warehouse equals chaos. I don't have cats, man. I have dogs. Okay. As President Trump refused to concede, the response was not mass action, but crickets. When media organizations called the race for Joe Biden on November 7th, jubilation broke out instead as people thronged across the country, across the U.S. to celebrate the democratic process that had resulted in Trump's ouster. Well, some people did. A second odd thing happened amid Trump's attempts to reverse the result. Reverse! These people don't even know how ironic they are when they write these articles. Hundreds of major business leaders, many of whom had backed Trump's candidacy and supported his policies, called on him to concede. To the president, something felt amiss. It was all very, very strange, Trump said on December 2nd. Within days after the election, we witnessed an orchestrated effort to anoint the winner. Many key states were still being counted. In a way, Trump was right. Holy shit, these people are insane. This is like, these people can't help but brag about what they did. They're literally bragging right here. They just admitted Trump was right. There was a conspiracy unfolding behind the scenes, one that both curtailed the protest and coordinated the resistance from CEOs. Both surprises were the result of an informal alliance between left-wing activists and business. Dude. Both surprises were, oh my God, these people. The pact was formalized in a terse, little-noticed joint statement in the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO published on Election Day. Both sides would come to see it as some sort of implicit bargain inspired by the summer's massive, sometimes destructive, racial justice protests in which the forces of labor came together with the forces of capital to keep the peace and oppose Trump's assault on democracy. Look at how they're framing this. Guys, this is terrifying. They're not only bragging about what they did, they're framing it in like the most propaganda way that this is like straight out of like something like, this is straight out of the Hunger Games. I'm just going to say it. This is straight out of the Hunger Games. The handshake between business and labor was just one component of a vast cross-partisan campaign to protect the election. An extraordinary shadow effort. An extraordinary shadow effort. Do these people even hear themselves? Dedicated not to winning the vote, but to ensuring it would be free, fair, credible, and uncorrupted. They're literally talking about a secret plan to fortify the election so that it would be perceived as uncorrupted. Oh my God. For more than a year, a loosely organized coalition of operatives scrambled to shore up America's institutions as they came under simultaneous attack from a remorseless pandemic and an autocratically inclined president. That's not what Trump is. Though much of this activity took place on the left, you think? Though much of this activity took place, though it was completely partisan in nature, we still think it resulted in a free and fair election. Does that make it was separate from the Biden campaign and crossed ideological lines with crucial contributions coming from nonpartisan and conservative actors. They contradicted themselves in the same sentence. Though much of this activity took place on the left, there were crucial contributions by nonpartisan and conservative actors. And you know what they mean by conservative actors? You want me to guess what they mean? Lincoln Project. Lincoln Project is conservative, not conservative. The scenarios of the shadow campaigners. Dude, do you think calling something a shadow campaign indicates credibility? Does anyone think that calling something a shadow campaign is like an indication of a free and fair election? A shadow campaign led to a completely free and fair and uncorrupted election. The scenario that the shadow campaigners were desperate to stop was not a Trump victory. Oh, I bet. It was an election so calamitous that no result could be discerned at all, a failure of the central act of democratic self-governance that is the hallmark of America since its founding. Their work touched every aspect of the election. They got states to change their voting systems and laws and helped secure hundreds of millions in public and private funding. You guys know why I'm pissed off at the right for spending 3 goddamn days complaining that AOC is lying? Because while the right is complaining that AOC is lying when AOC lies every time she opens her damn mouth, you know what the left is doing? They got states to change the voting systems and laws and help secure hundreds of millions in public and private funding to rig the election. Oh, I'm sorry, not rig. Fortify the election with their what did they call it? Shadow campaigners. They fended off voter suppression lawsuits, recruited armies of poll workers, and got millions of people to vote by mail for the first time. They successfully pressured social media companies to take a harder line against disinformation and use data-driven strategies to fight viral smears. Those viral smears, I'm going to bet you, are things like the New York Post article that was completely proven right. They executed national public awareness campaigns that helped Americans understand how the vote count would unfold over days or weeks, preventing Trump's conspiracy theories and false claims of victory from getting more traction. After Election Day, they monitored every pressure point to ensure that Trump could not overturn the result. The untold story of the election is the thousands of people of both parties, I'm going to put that in quotes because I don't believe that for one red second, of both parties who accomplished the triumph of American democracy at its very foundation, said Norm Eisen, a prominent lawyer and former Obama administration official who recruited Republicans and Democrats to the board of the Voter Protection Program. We need to look up what this voter protection program is at some point. Former Obama administration official. Yep. Guys, for those who are just joining, expecting to see a conversation with a lefty, I don't got her right this second. I'm reaching out. I'm trying. Oh, that was not what I wanted you guys to see, but whatever. Oh, hang on. Let me stop share for just 1 second. Hang on. I'm gonna check my DMs. Oh. Yeah, okay, so guys, we don't have her now because time zone issue. She just DM'd me saying she's live for her show, but maybe she can go live after. Hang on. What time does your show end? I'm trying to coordinate this. We're gonna read the rest of this article though. Don't worry. I'm sorry, guys. Time zone confusion. I don't know what happened. All right, let's read the rest of this article. For Trump and his allies were running their own campaign to spoil the election. You guys are talking about having shadow campaigners, and you're. The president spent months insisting that mail ballots were a Democratic plot and the election would be rigged. Hang on. They got states to change voting systems and laws to help secure millions in public and private funding. They blah, 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 got millions of people to vote by mail for the first time. The very next paragraph. The president spent months insisting that mail ballots were a Democratic plot and the election was rigged. Trump was right. This is literally saying Trump was right. Am I wrong to say that? This is literally saying Trump was right. His henchmen at the state level sought to block their use while his lawyers brought dozens of spurious lawsuits to make it more difficult to vote. What they're talking about is voter ID, an intensification of the GOP's legacy of suppressive tactics. Do you guys know that I think I heard this in Pennsylvania. They're requiring ID to get a COVID vaccine, but they don't require an ID to vote? How is that not racist? They're requiring an ID to get the COVID vaccine, but to vote, it's completely okay not to have an ID. All right. Before the election, Trump plotted to block a legitimate vote count. It's not as though Trump had shadow campaigners. They're talking about how they had shadow campaigns and they're like, Trump was plotting to block. Oh, Trump plotted to block a legitimate vote count, and he spent the months following November 3rd trying to steal the election he'd lost, with lawsuits and conspiracy theories, pressure on states and local officials, and finally summoning his army of supporters to the January 6th rally that ended in deadly violence at the Capitol. The Democracy campaigners watched with alarm every week. We felt like we were Every week we felt like we were in a struggle to pull off this election without the country going through a real dangerous moment of unraveling. Oh my God, said former GOP representative Zach Wamp, a Trump supporter who helped coordinate a bipartisan election protection council. We can look back and say this thing went pretty well, but it was not all clear in September and October that that was going to be the case. This is the inside story of the conspiracy. They called this a conspiracy. This is an inside story. Go away, Time. I'm not subscribing to you. This is an inside story of the conspiracy to save the 2020 election based on access to the group's inner workings, never before seen documents, and interviews with dozens of those involved across the political spectrum. And it's a story of unprecedented, creative, and determined campaign whose success also reveals how close the nation came to disaster. Every attempt to interfere with the proper outcome of the election was defeated, says Ian Bassin, co-founder of the Protect Democracy, a nonpartisan rule of law advocacy group. But it's massively important for the country to understand that it didn't happen accidentally. The system didn't work magically. Democracy is not self-executing. It was just a matter of time before somebody had to start bragging about the election and how they did it. That's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. Hey guys, can you do me a favor? If people pop into the chat as I'm reading this and they're like, where's the lefty? Can you just explain to them what's going on and then I'm going to reschedule? Thank you. That's why the participants that's why the participants want the secret history of the 2020 election told. Oh my God. Solo 19YT, could you have had a more appropriate super chat when you say it was just a matter of time that they started bragging? That's why the participants want the secret history of the 2020 election told, even though it sounds like a paranoid fever dream, a well-funded cabal of powerful people ranging across industries and ideologies working together behind the scenes to influence perceptions, change rules and laws, steer media coverage, and control the flow of information. They were not rigging the election. They were fortifying. The shadow campaigners were not rigging anything. That's why they're called shadow campaigners, because they're doing the Lord's work. They're fortifying the election. Here, someone asked for a link in the chat to the story. Here you go. And they believe the public needs to understand the system's fragility in order to ensure that democracy in America endures. Yeah, I bet they want their version of establishment democracy to endure. I'm sure that is absolutely correct. The architect. Sometime in the fall of 2019, Mike Podhorzer, that's an unfortunate name, became convinced the election was headed for disaster and determined to protect it. Let's learn about him. This was not his usual purview. For nearly a century, he was the senior advisor to the AFL-CIO. Yeah, that definitely sounds nonpartisan. The nation's largest union federation. Please post hashtags like this. I like, thank you, Molly Ball paired with whistleblower and protect the. So there are some helpful hashtags from 63 Rambler. Thank you for the super chat. So the guy that was president of the AFL, an advisor to the president of the AFL-CIO, the nation's largest union federation, has marshaled the latest tactics and data to help its favored candidates win election. I'm sorry, what? Does Time Magazine hear itself? I'm just going to read this again. The person that orchestrated these shadow campaigners to help fortify the election is a senior advisor to the president of the AFL-CIO, which marshaled the latest tactics and data to help its favored candidates win elections. Do we think that the AFL-CIO supported Donald Trump? I don't think the AFL-CIO supported Donald Trump. I'm just going to take a stab in the dark. Unassuming and professorial, he isn't the sort of hair gel political strategist who shows up on cable news. Among Democratic insiders, oh, that's shocking. He is known as the wizard behind some of the biggest advances in political technology in recent decades. A group of liberal strategists he brought together in the early 2000s led to the creation of the Analyst Institute, a secret firm that applies scientific methods to political campaigns. He was also involved in the founding of Catalyst, the flagship progressive data company. Yeah, I am sure that this is a person that was working for free and fair elections and he just wanted the outcome to be fair. He didn't have a favorite candidate at all. Good Up Bazaar says, this sounds like real fascism, just saying. Yep. The endless chatter in Washington about political strategy, Podhoser, that is a really unfortunate name, believes he has little to do with how change really gets made. My basic take on the politics is that it's pretty obvious if you don't overthink it or swallow the prevailing frameworks whole, he once wrote. After that, just relentlessly identify your assumptions and challenge them. Podhorzer applies that approach to everything. When he coached his now adult son's Little League team in the DC suburbs, he trained boys not to swing at most pitches, a tactic that infuriated both their opponents and their parents, but won the team a series of championships. Trump's election in 2016, credited in part to his unusual strength among the sort of blue-collar white voters who once dominated the AFL-CIO, prompted Podhoser to question his assumptions about voter behavior. Oh! Okay, so what this is saying is like, so the AFL-CIO was like, oh shit, our voters went for Trump. Why would our voters go for Trump? We need to stop this immediately. He began circulating weekly numbers crunching memo to small circle of allies, hosting strategy sessions in DC while he began to worry about the election himself. He didn't want to seem paranoid. It was only after months of research that he produced his concerns in his newsletter in October 2019. The usual tools of data analytics and polling would not be sufficient in a situation where the president himself was trying to disrupt the election, he wrote. Most of our planning takes us through election day, but we are not prepared for the two most likely outcomes: Trump losing and refusing to concede, and Trump winning the Electoral College despite losing the popular vote by corrupting the voting process in each state. So you can see that the guy that organized the shadow campaigners who are responsible for a free and fair election, according to Time, is literally saying that the only two possible outcomes for the election back in like 2019 are that Trump loses and refuses to concede, and Trump loses the popular vote but wins the Electoral College because he corrupted the voting process. Oh yeah, I'm sure this guy was responsible for free and fair elections. For those of you who have just joined, unfortunately, we had a mix-up in terms of time zones. She didn't show up. I'm going to reschedule the chat with her. So we're looking at the Time magazine article instead. That's what we're doing right now. But I promise I will reschedule. Okay. We desperately need to systematically red team the election so we can anticipate and plan for the worst we know will be coming our way. It turned out Podhoser wasn't the only one thinking in these terms. He began to hear from others eager to join forces. The Fight Back Table, a coalition of resistance organizations. Oh yeah, so this is going to be pro-Trump right here. Resistance organizations had begun scenario planning around the potential for a contested election, gathering liberal activists at the local and national levels into what is called democracy defense coalitions. Oh, Jesus. No, decline, you spammers. Alexandra M says, shadow campaigners, can they pick a more ominous sounding name? No, I don't think that they can. No. Voting rights and civil rights organizations were raising alarms. Yeah, so this is definitely going to be left-leaning. A group of former elected officials, while researching emergency powers they feared Trump might exploit. Protect democracy. Dude, like, these people are so brazen. A group of former elected officials, after researching the emergency powers they feel Trump might exploit. Protect democracy was assembling a bipartisan election crisis task force. So they're talking about their fear that Trump is going to not concede, and then they're calling themselves bipartisan. Yeah, I bet. It turns out that once you say it out loud, people agreed, and it started building momentum. He spent months pondering scenarios and talking to experts. It wasn't hard to find liberals who saw Trump as a dangerous dictator. Oh my God, the spam people, Jesus. Let's see. It wasn't hard to find liberals who saw Trump as a dangerous dictator, but Podhorzer was careful to stay clear of hysteria. I'm going to bet you money that every single person that was involved in this had Trump derangement syndrome. Every single one. What he wanted to know was not how American democracy was dying, but how it might be kept alive by defeating the evil Donald Trump. It's the only way to keep it alive. The chief difference between the US and countries that lost their grip on democracy, he concluded, was that America's decentralized election system couldn't be rigged in one fell swoop. That presented an Okay, I'm going to read this again. The chief difference between the US and countries that lose their grip on democracy, he concluded, was that America's decentralized system couldn't be rigged in one fell swoop. And this presented an opportunity to shore it up. Do you guys get that? Like, that's crazy. He literally just admitted that they were like gaming the election system because it was like they were like, it's too hard for them to rig it, so we have to get in there and do it first. And then they're bragging about it. On March 3rd, Podhorzer drafted a 3-page confidential memo titled Threats to the 2020 Election. Trump has made it clear that this will not be a fair election and that he will reject anything but his own re-election as fake and rigged. Do you guys remember when Hillary Clinton told Joe Biden not to concede under any circumstances, and that's completely okay? Yeah, okay. On November 3rd, the media should report otherwise. Oh my God. Trump has made it clear that this will not be a fair election and that he will reject anything but his own re-election as fake and rigged, he wrote. On November 3rd, the media should report otherwise. This guy is telling the media what to report. He will use right-wing information systems to establish his narrative and incite his supporters to protest. The memo laid out 4 categories of challenges: attacks on voters, attacks on the election, on election administration, attacks on Trump's political opponents, and efforts to reverse the results of the election. They literally planned out their entire. They're describing how they rigged I'm sorry, YouTube, how they fortified the election. Then COVID-19 erupted at the height of the primary election season. Normal methods of voting were no longer safe for the mostly elderly volunteers who normally staffed polling places, but political disagreements intensified by Trump's crusade against mail-in voting prevented some states from making it easier to vote absentee and for jurisdictions to count those votes in a timely manner. Chaos ensued. Ohio shut down in-person voting in its primary, leading to minuscule turnout. A poll worker shortage in Milwaukee, where Wisconsin's heavily Democratic, Black population is concentrated, left just 5 polling places open, down from 182. In New York, vote counting took more than a month. Good Up Bazaar says, so Fox News reporting states Trump clearly was ahead, like North Carolina and Arizona. Yep. They'll finish with, and that's why we know Trump did not win the election. They probably will, Emily. We'll have to see. In April, Podhorzer began hosting a weekly 2.5 hour Zoom. It was structured around a series of rapid fire 5-minute presentations on everything from which ads were working to messaging to legal strategy. The invitation only gathering soon attracted hundreds, creating a rare shared space of knowledge for the fractious progressive movement. Just admitted this was progressive. You guys want to know why I rail on you for screaming about AOC for several days at a time? Because this is what the progressives are doing. This is how they're spending their time, and this is why they won. This right here. This. At the risk of trash talking about the left, there's not a lot of good information sharing, says Anat Senecar Osario, a close podhoser friend whose poll-tested messaging guidance shaped the group's approach. There's a lot of non-invented here syndrome where people won't consider a good idea if they didn't come up with it. The meetings became the galactic center for a constellation of operatives across the group who shared overlapping goals, but didn't usually work in concert. The group had no name, no leaders, no hierarchy, kind of like Antifa, but it kept the disparate actors in sync. Pod played a critical role in behind the scenes role in keeping different pieces of the movement, infrastructure, and communication and aligned, says Maurice Mitchell, National Director of the Working Families Party. You have the litigation, the organizing space, the political people just focused on the W. Yeah. The political people just focused on winning is a part of this group. And their strategies aren't always aligned. He allowed the ecosystems to work together. Protecting the election would require an effort of unprecedented scale. As 2020 progressed, it stretched to Congress, Silicon Valley, and the nation's state houses. It drew energy from the summer's racial justice protests. Many of the leaders were a key part of the Liberal Alliance. And eventually it reached across the aisle into the world of Trump skeptical Republicans appalled by his attacks on democracy. So this is what they mean when they say it was nonpartisan. That's what they mean. Trump skeptical Republicans. Okay. Securing the vote. The first task was overhauling America's bulky election infrastructure in the middle of a pandemic. For the thousands of local, mostly nonpartisan officials who administer elections, the most urgent need was money. They needed protective equipment like masks, gloves, hand sanitizer. They needed to pay for postcards letting people know they could vote absentee, or in some states, to mail ballots to every voter. They needed additional staff, scanners, to process ballots. In March, activists appealed to Congress to steer COVID relief money to the election administration. Led by the House Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, more than 150 organizations signed a letter to every member of Congress seeking $2 billion in election funding. It was somewhat successful. The CARES Act, passed later that month, contained $400 million in grants to state election administrators, but the next tranche of relief funding didn't add to that number. It wasn't going to be enough. Private philanthropy stepped into the breach. An assortment of foundations contributed tens of millions in election administration funding. The Chan Zuckerberg Initiative chipped in $300 million. Has everyone seen that Project Veritas video where Mark Zuckerberg is talking about how closely he aligns with Biden's executive orders? The Chan Zuckerberg Initiative chipped in $300 million to fortifying the election. It was a failure at the federal level that 2,500 election officials were forced to pay philanthropic grants to fill their needs, says Amber McReynolds, a former Denver election official who heads the nonpartisan National Vote at Home Institute. Yeah, I am sure that the National Vote at Home Institute is a completely nonpartisan organization. I am sure that passes the smell test. McReynolds' 2-year-old organization became a clearinghouse for a nation struggling to adapt. The Institute gave secretaries of state from both parties technical advice on everything From which vendors to use to how to locate drop boxes. Local officials are the most trusted sources of election information, but few can afford a press secretary, so the Institute distributed communications toolkits. In the presentation, Podhoser's group, McReynolds, detailed the importance of absentee ballots for shortening lines at polling places, preventing an election crisis. The Institute's work helped 37 states and DC bolster mail in voting. But it wouldn't be worth much if people didn't take advantage. Oh my God. Part of the challenge was logistical. Each state has different rules for how and when ballots should be requested and returned. The Voter Participation Center, which in normal years would have deployed canvassers door to door to get out the vote, instead conducted focus groups in April and May to find out what would get people to vote by mail. This is why the left win, guys. This is why, right here. They had every part of this covered. In August and September, it sent ballot applications to 15 million people in key states, 4.6 million of whom returned them. In mailings and digital ads, the group urged people not to wait until Election Day. All the work we have done for 17 years was built for the moment of bringing democracy to people's doorsteps, says Tom Lopak, the center CEO. The effort had to overcome heightened skepticism in some communities. Many Black voters preferred to exercise their franchise in person or didn't trust the mail. National civil rights groups worked with local organizations to get the word out in the best way to ensure one's votes counted. In Philadelphia, for example, advocates distributed voting safety kits containing masks, hand sanitizer, and informational brochures. We had to get the message out that this is safe, reliable, and you can trust it, says Hannah of All Voting is Local. At the same time, Democratic lawyers battled a historic tide of pre-election litigation. The pandemic intensified the parties' usual tangling in courts, but the lawyers noticed something else as well. The litigation brought by the Trump campaign was a piece with the broader campaign to sow doubt about mail-in voting, was making novel claims and using theories no court has ever accepted, said Wendy Weiser, a voting rights expert at the Brennan Center of Justice at NYU. They read more like lawsuits designed to send a message rather than to achieve a clear legal outcome. In the end, nearly half the electorate cast ballots by mail in 2020, practically a revolution in how people vote. About a quarter voted early in person. Only a quarter of voters cast their ballots the traditional way. And I'm gonna just say this. If only a quarter of people who voted cast their ballots in the traditional way, then what the hell were Republicans doing? Trump got 74 million votes. Only a quarter of the total votes were cast in the traditional way. Why are Trump people voting by goddamn mail? Why? Thank you for throwing away your vote, Republicans who voted by mail. Well done. Well done. The Disinformation Defense. Bad actors spreading false information is nothing new for decades. Campaigns have grappled with everything from anonymous calls claiming the election has been rescheduled to flyers sending nasty smears about the candidates' families. But Trump's lies and conspiracy theories, the viral force of social media, and the involvement of foreign meddlers made disinformation a broader, deeper threat to the 2020 vote. Laura Quinn, a veteran progressive operative who co-founded Catalyst, began studying a veteran progressive operative. Yep. Began studying the problem years ago. She piloted a nameless secret project, which she has never before discussed publicly, that tracked disinformation online and tried to figure out how to combat it. One component was tracking dangerous lies that might otherwise spread unnoticed. How much you want to bet that she wasn't just tracking things that were actual lies? I'm just going to say. Researchers then provided information to campaigners or the media to track down the sources and expose them. The most important takeaway from Quinn's research, however, was that engaging with toxic content only made it worse. When you get attacked, the instinct is to push back, call it out, and say, "This isn't true," Quinn says. But the more engagement something gets, the more the platform boosts it. The algorithm reads it as, "Oh, this is popular. People want more of it." Oh, here it is. Here it is. The solution, she concluded, was to pressure platforms to enforce their rules, both by removing content and accounts that spread disinformation and by far more aggressive policing in the first place. The platforms have policies against the type of certain malign behavior, but they haven't been enforcing them, she said. Quinn's research gave ammunition to advocates pushing social media platforms to take a harder line. In November 2019, Mark Zuckerberg invited 9 civil rights leaders to dinner at his house, where they warned him about the danger of election related falsehoods that were already spreading unchecked. It took, oh my God, it took pushing, urging, conversations, brainstorming, all of that to get it to a place where we ended up with more rigorous rules and enforcement, said Vanida Gupta, president and CEO of a leadership conference on civil and human rights, who attended the dinner and also met with Twitter's CEO Jack Dorsey, among others. No one is surprised. Gupta had been a nominee for Associate Attorney General under President Joe Biden. It was a struggle, but we got to the point where they understood the problem. Was it enough? Probably not. Was it later than he wanted? Yes. But it was really important, given the level of official disinformation that had come in the rules in place and were tagging things and taking them down. Spreading the word. Beyond battling bad information, there was a need to explain a rapidly changing election process. It was crucial for voters to understand that despite what Trump was saying, mail in votes weren't susceptible to fraud, and that it would be normal if some states weren't finished counting votes on election night. Dick Gephardt, the former Democratic House leader turned high powered lobbyist, spearheaded one coalition. Oh, that's good. Come on. We wanted to get a really bipartisan group of former election officials, cabinet secretaries, military leaders, and so on, aimed mainly at messaging to the public, but also speaking to local officials, the Secretary of State, Attorney General, governors, who would be in the eye of the storm, to let them know we wanted to help, says Gephardt, who worked his contacts in the private sector to put $20 million behind the effort. Guys, if you're just joining, this is not exactly what the planned chat was for today, but I think this is actually pretty good because we're reviewing this Time magazine article that came out about how the Democrats fortified the 2020 election. I apologize that I do not have my guest here today, but there was a mix-up in terms of time zones. I'm going to reschedule it, but this is actually pretty good. Hit that like button if you're enjoying this so far. I appreciate it. WAMP, the former GOP congressman, worked through the nonpartisan reform group Issue 1 to rally Republicans. We thought we should bring some bipartisan element of unity around what constitutes a free and fair election. WAMP says the 22 Democrats and 22 Republicans on the National Council on Election Integrity met on Zooms at least once a week. And when they're saying 22 Republicans, guys, we know exactly what Republicans those are. We know exactly what type of Republicans those are. Those are rhinos and neocons. They ran ads in 6 states, made statements, wrote articles, and alerted local officials to potential problems. We had rabid Trump. No, you didn't. This is a lie. I want receipts on this one. I don't believe this for one red second. We had rabid Trump supporters who agreed to serve on the council based on the idea that this is honest. BS. I call bullshit. This was just as important, he told them, to convince the liberals when Trump wins. Whichever way it cuts, we're going to stick together. I don't believe that for one If you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you. I'll tell you what. The The Voting Rights Lab and Into Action created state-specific memes and graphics spread by email, text, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, urging that every vote be counted. Together, they were viewed more than 1 billion times. Protect Democracy's Election Task Force issued reports and held media briefings with high-profile experts across the political spectrum, resulting in the widespread coverage of potential election issues and fact-checking of Trump's false claims. Notice they don't just say fact-checking, specifically fact-checking of Trump. Because no one else can lie except Donald Trump in the land of the Trump deranged. The organization's tracking polls found the message was being heard. The percentage of public that didn't expect to know the winner on election night gradually rose. By late October, it was over 70%. A majority also believed the prolonged count wasn't a sign of a problem. We knew exactly what Trump was going to do. He was going to try to use the fact that Democrats voted by mail and Republicans voted in person to make it look like he was ahead, claim victory, says the mail-in votes were fraudulent, and try to get them thrown out, said Protect Democracy's Besson. Setting public expectations ahead of time helped undercut those lies. Do you guys know what state was it that is actually now, the courts have actually now said they just handled the election completely illegally in terms of the mail-in votings? I don't know. I guess that's actually good. Carlin sounds so normal in 1.5 speed normally. It's hard to understand people. I guess that's a good thing. Okay. The Alliance took a common set of themes, such as the senior research Schenecker, I don't know how to say that name, presented at Pods Zooms. Studies have shown that when people don't think their vote will count or fear casting it will be a hassle, they're far less likely to participate. Throughout the election, member of Podhorser's group minimized incidents of voter intimidation and tamped down rising liberal hysteria about Trump's expected refusal to concede. They didn't want to amplify false claims by engaging them or put people off voting by suggesting a rigged game. And really, guys, the Republicans could have learned a lesson from this. Because you want to know how they lost Georgia? You want to know how they're going to lose probably more elections than they want moving forward? They haven't done that. When you say the claims of fraud are spurious, what people hear is fraud. What we saw in our pre-election research was that anything that reaffirmed Trump's power or cast him as an authoritarian diminishes people's desire to vote. Okay. Podhorser, meanwhile, was warning everyone he knew that polls were underestimating Trump's support. Well, at least he got that right. See, they knew. Oh my God. They knew. They knew that the polls that the media was talking about were wrong. They flat knew that the polls were wrong. The data he shared with media organizations who would be calling the election was tremendously useful to understand what was happening as votes rolled in, according to a member of a major network's political unit who spoke with Podhorser before Election Day. I wonder if that was Fox. I bet you it might have been Fox. That would have been funny. Most analysts had recognized that there would be a blue shift in key battlegrounds, the surge of voters breaking towards Democrats driven by tallies of mail-in ballots, but they hadn't comprehended how much better Trump was likely to do on Election Day. Being able to document how big the absentee wave would be and the variance by state was essential. Why? Hang on. Why? If all you're going for, if the only goal is to have a free and fair election, then why is it critical to document how big the absentee wave would be and the variance by state? Why is that critical if all you're interested in is a free and fair election? That is only critical if you're trying to fortify the election towards the candidate that you want. Otherwise, all you want to do is make sure those votes are counted. The variance does not matter if all you're talking about is a free and fair election. People power. The racial justice uprising sparked by George Floyd's killings in May was not primarily a political movement. What? The racial justice uprising sparked by George Floyd's killing in May was not primarily a political movement. The organizers who helped lead it wanted to harness its momentum for the election without allowing it to be co opted by politicians. Many of these organizers were part of Podhoser's network, from the activists in the battleground states who partnered with the Democracy Defense Coalition to organizations with leading roles in the movement for Black lives. Hang on. Many of the organizations in Podhorser's network, which we already know he's a progressive, right? From the activists in battleground states who partnered with Democracy Defense Coalition, progressive, to organizations with leading roles in the movement for Black lives, Marxist. The best way to ensure people's voices were heard, they decided, was to protect their ability to vote. We started thinking about a program that would complete or complement the traditional election protection area that also didn't rely on calling the police, says the Working Families Party National Organizing Director. They created a force of election defenders who, unlike traditional poll watchers, were trained in de escalation techniques. Election defenders. Do you guys remember in like Philadelphia, Will Chamberlain got video of them not allowing registered poll watchers in? How much do you want to bet that was election defenders? During early voting and on election day, they surrounded lines of voters in urban areas with a joy to the polls effort that turned like the act of casting a ballot into a street party. That definitely sounds like something that the left would do. Black organizers also recruited thousands of poll workers to. Wow. Black organizers also recruited thousands of poll workers to ensure polling places would stay open in their communities. The summer uprising has shown that people power had a massive impact. Activists began preparing to reprise the demonstrations if Trump tried to steal the election. Americans plan widespread protests if Trump interferes with the election, Reuters reported in October. One of many such stories. More than 150 liberal groups, from the Women's March to the Sierra Club to Color of Change to Democrats.com to Democratic Socialists of America, joined the Protect the Results Coalition. Do these people even hear themselves? Remember, we're talking, the basis of this article is that shadow campaigners just wanted a free and fair election. That's all they wanted, a free and fair election. More than 150 liberal groups, from the Women's March to the Sierra Club to the Color of Change to Democrats.com to the Democratic Socialists of America, joined the Protect the Results Coalition. The group's now defunct website had a map listing 400 planned post-election demonstrations to be activated via text message as soon as November 4th to stop the coup they feared the left was ready to flood the streets. Strange bedfellows. About a week before the election day, Podhoser received an unexpected message. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce wanted to talk to him. Okay, so now we're getting to government officials who hate Trump, who just want to go back to the establishment, business as usual, are worming their way in to this AFL-CIO-driven shadow campaign to fortify the election. The AFL-CIO and the Chamber had a long history of antagonism, though neither organization is explicitly partisan. Okay. The influential business lobby has poured hundreds of millions of dollars into Republican campaigns, just as the nation's union funnels hundreds of millions of dollars to Democrats. On one side is labor, on the other, management, locked in the eternal struggle for power and resources. No. Anytime you're talking about a struggle for power, that's the left. That's the left. But behind the scenes, the community was engaged in its own anxious discussions about how the election and its aftermath might unfold. The summer's racial justice protests had sent a signal to business owners the potential for economy disruption, civil order. With tensions running high, There was a lot of concern about unrest around the election or a breakdown in our normal way to handle contentious elections, says Neil Bradley, the Chamber's executive vice president and chief policy officer. Oh my God, these people. Hang on. Okay. These worries had led the chamber to release a pre-election statement with the Business Roundtable, with Washington-based CEO groups, as well as Association of Chamber of Manufacturers, Wholesalers, Retailers, calling for patience and confidence as votes were counted. Goddamn Chamber of Commerce, man. Bureaucrats and establishment. That's who the Chamber of Commerce is. Like, goddamn bureaucrats. But Bradley wanted to send a broader message, a more bipartisan message. He reached out to Podhoser, who was intermediary both men declined to name. Agreeing that their unlikely alliance would be powerful, they began to discuss a joint statement pledging their organization's shared commitment to a free and peaceful election. Those choose their words carefully and scheduled the statement's release for maximum impact. As it was being finalized, Christian leaders signaled their interest in joining, further broadening its research. Or its reach, rather, sorry. The statement was released on Election Day under the names the Chamber CEO Thomas Donahue, AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka, and the heads of the National Association of Evangelicals and National African American Clergy Network. It is imperative that election officials be given the space and time to count every vote in accordance with applicable laws, it stated. We call on the media, the candidates, and the American people to exercise patience with the process and trust in the system, even if it requires more time than usual, the groups added. Although we may not agree on the desired outcomes, up and down the ballot, we are united in our call for American democratic process to proceed without violence, intimidation, or any other tactic that makes us weaker as a nation. How much longer do I have to go in this article? This article is long. Okay, a little bit left. We have a little bit left. Okay. Showing up, standing down. Election night began with many Democrats despairing. Trump was running ahead of pre-election polling, winning Florida, Ohio, and Texas, and easily keeping Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania too close to call. But Podhoser was unperturbed. The guy running this little shadow campaign was unperturbed on election night. The returns were exactly in line with his modeling. They figured it all out. He had been warning for weeks that Trump voter turnout was surging. As the numbers dribble out, he could tell you as long as all the votes were counted, Trump would lose. Why would he know that on election night? Why would he know that? Guys, if you just got here, I'm sorry my guest today couldn't make it. We had a little scheduling snafu, but we're moving forward anyway. I'm going to read this article from Time Magazine. I'm going to reschedule the chat, so I apologize for that. But if you like this article, please hit a thumbs up button. Thank you. The Liberal Alliance gathered for an 11 p.m. Zoom call. Hundreds joined. Many were freaking out. It was really important for me. Wait. If this is a bipartisan effort and all they want is a free and fair election, then why are they freaking out on election night? And why is the leader totally calm, thinking Trump's going to lose? As soon as they count all the votes, Trump is going to lose. Everyone else is freaking out about the results. Why? If all they wanted is a free and fair election, then why are they freaking out that Trump's winning? It is really important for me and the team in that moment to help ground people in what we had already known was true, says Angela People, the directors for Democracy Defense Coalition. Podhoser presented the data to show the group that victory wasn't it. Dude! If all they want... Podhoser presented data to show the group that victory was in hand. If all they wanted was a free and fair election, then why did they consider Joe Biden winning a victory? The victory should have been a free and fair election. This is actual insanity. How the hell did Time magazine publish this? I knew this article was going to be bad. I did not expect it to be this bad. They have literally laid out exactly what they did. While he was talking, Fox News surprised everyone by calling Arizona for Biden. I told you it was Fox News that they were talking to. I told you. The public awareness campaign had worked. TV anchors were bending over backwards to counsel caution and frame the vote accurately. The question then became what to do next. The conversation that followed was a difficult one, led by the activist charged with a protest strategy. He wanted to be mindful of when was the right time to call for the moving masses of people into the street. They were literally coordinating on whether or not to move masses of people into the street to protest the election. We wanted to be mindful of when the right time to call for moving masses into the street, people said. As much as they were eager to mount a show of strength, mobilizing immediately could backfire and put people at risk. Protests that devolved into violent clashes would give Trump a pretext to send in federal agents or troops, as he had over the summer. And rather than elevate Trump's complaints by continuing to fight him, the alliance wanted to send the message that the people had spoken. So the word went out, stand down, protect the results, announced that it would not be activating the entire national mobilization network today, but remains ready to activate if necessary. On Twitter, outraged progressive groups wondered what was going on. Why wasn't anyone trying to stop Trump's coup? Where were all the protests? Podhoser credits the activists for their restraint. They spent so much time getting ready to hit the streets on Wednesday, but they did it, he said. Wednesday through Friday, there was not a single Antifa versus Proud Boys incident like everyone was expecting, and when that didn't materialize, I don't think the Trump campaign had a backup plan. Dude, the right was never going to protest. The right was never going to do this. This is completely unhinged with reality. Activists reoriented the Protect the Results protest towards a weekend of celebration. That's why there were people in the streets. That's why. Because they had this entire little network of activists ready to protest on a moment's notice. And when they didn't get their little protest, they decided to coordinate Biden, and they sent their little activists into the street for that. Wow. Mary says, I'm asking now before I forget, local Zoom call. How does that work? Totally interested. Also, book recommendations. Actually, Mary, it's funny that you asked that because we do Zoom calls with my locals community every Tuesday and Thursday. The information is at kb.locals.com. You can find that in the description below. It is a supporter only option, so you do have to sign up as a supporter, which is like $5 a month. Also, actually, I'll bring that back up. In terms of book recommendations, we are actually doing a book club right now in my locals where we're reading Cynical Theories. We are going to have a book club meeting on February 16th. And James Lindsay is actually going to be joining us for that meeting. So if you want to, now is the right time to get into my locals, kb.locals.com. You'll have all the information about the Zoom calls. I'm going to post information about the book club today, and James Lindsay will be joining us for that book club for Cynical Theories on February 16th. Yes, at 5 p.m. So it's a great time to get into locals. All right. Activists oriented the Protect the Results protest towards a weekend celebration, counter the disinfo with our confidence, and get ready to celebrate, read the messaging guidance that they presented to the Liberal Alliance on November 6th. This was one day before the media coordinated to coronate Biden. They were sending messaging out to their people, telling them, get ready to celebrate in the streets. Declare and fortify our win. Vibe, confident, forward-looking, unified, not passive, anxious. The voters, not the candidates, would be the protagonists in the story. Their view on reality is so twisted they don't realize, other than shadow, every word to describe what they did led to the opposite of its meaning. The planned day of celebration happened to coincide with the election being called. Oh my God, what a coincidence. I'm sure that wasn't coordinated at all. Activists dancing in the streets of Philadelphia blasted Beyonce over an attempted Trump campaign press conference. The Trumpers' next confab was scheduled for 4 Seasons Total Landscaping outside the city center, where activists believe was not a coincidence. The people of Philadelphia own the streets of Philadelphia, crows the working class party's Mitchell. Working class party, by the way, I'm going to guess is code word for communist. We made them look ridiculous by contrasting our joyous celebration of democracy with their clown show. The votes had been counted. Trump had lost, but the battle wasn't over. The 5 steps to victory. Again, I have to emphasize, victory was supposed to be a free and fair election. So why are we talking about victory as a Biden win if the supposed goal of this nonpartisan shadow campaign group to fortify the election, they just wanted a free and fair election. That's all they wanted. That was the victory. So then why is a Biden win considered a victory? Yeah. In Podhorser's presentations, winning the vote, exactly, was only the first step towards winning the election. After that, dude, someone please make sure to archive this article immediately. I mean, please, someone in the chat archive this article immediately. Because this is crazy. Naughty One says, yes, working class party is communist. Knew it. After winning the vote count, winning the certification, winning the electoral college, and winning the transition, steps that are normally formalities, but they knew Trump would see as opportunities for disruption. This was a fortification at literally every level. Nowhere would be more evident than in Michigan, where Trump's pressure on local Republicans came perilously close to working, and where liberal, conservative, pro-democracy forces joined to counter it. It was around 10 p.m. on election night in Detroit when a flurry of texts lit up the phone of Art Reyes III. A busload of Republican election observers had arrived at the TCF Center where the votes were being tallied. Oh my God. A busload of Republican election observers had arrived at the TCF Center where the votes were being tallied. They were crowding the voting tables, refusing to wear masks, heckling the mostly black workers. Ray is a Flint native who leads the We the People Michigan. Were expecting this. For months, conservative groups had been sowing suspicion about urban voter fraud. The language, they're going to steal the election, there will be fraud in Detroit, long cast doubt. So now they're talking about how they planned to keep Republican poll watchers from watching the polls. You can literally see people wearing masks, by the way. The article says they were refusing to wear masks. You can literally, in the photo, see people wearing masks. Trump supporters seek to disrupt the vote. These are, dude, look at this. A busload of Republican election observers. These are election observers. Trump supporters seek to disrupt the vote. There's a post with an archive link on your locals. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your service. I appreciate it. He made his way to the arena and sent word to his network. Within 45 minutes, dozens of reinforcements had arrived. As they entered the arena to provide a counterweight to the GOP observers inside, Reyes took down their cell phone numbers and added them to a massive text chain. Racial justice activists from Detroit Will Breathe worked alongside suburban women from Femmes for Dems and local election officials. Reyes left at 3 a.m., handing the text change over to a disability activist. As they mapped out the steps in the election certification process, activists settled on a strategy of foregrounding the people's right to decide, demanding their voices will be heard, and calling attention to the racial implications of disenfranchising Black Detroiters. So now they literally just described how they planned to brand this entire thing, how they planned to 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 convince people that if Republican poll watchers show up, they want to prevent black people from voting. That's what they just described. That's how they're branding it. They flooded the Wayne County Canvassing Board's November 17th certification meeting with on-message testimony. Despite a Trump tweet, the Republican board members certified Detroit's votes. The election boards were one pressure point. Another GOP-controlled legislatures who Trump believed could declare the election void and appoint their own electors. And so the president invited GOP leaders of the Michigan legislature, House Speaker Lee Chatfield and Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey, to Washington on November 20th. It was a perilous moment. If Chatfield and Shirkey agreed to do Trump's bidding, Republicans in the state might be similarly bullied. I was concerned things were, again, I have to ask, if all they wanted was a free and fair election, then why are they doing it every step of the way? Why are they trying to rig the system to brand the entire thing to force public opinion behind a Joe Biden victory? Why is this even part of the process if all they wanted was a free and fair election? None of this would be necessary. Literally, none of this would be necessary if all they wanted was a free and fair election. I was concerned things were about to get weird, says Jeff Timmer, a former Michigan GOP chair turned anti-Trump activist. Norm Eisen described it as the scariest moment of the entire election. The democracy defenders launched a full court press, protect democracy's local contacts, research the lawyers' personal and political motives. Issue 1 ran television ads in Lansing. The Chambers Bradley kept close tabs on the process. Wamp, the former Republican congressman, called his former colleague Mike Rogers, who wrote an op-ed for the Detroit newspaper urging officials to honor the will of the voters. 3 former Michigan governors, Republican John Engler, Rick Snyder, and Democrat Jennifer Granholm, jointly called for Michigan's electoral votes to be cast free of pressure from the White House. Engler, a former head of the Business Roundtable, made a phone call to influential donors and fellow GOP elder statesmen who could press the lawmakers privately. The pro-democracy forces were up against a Trump-fueled Michigan GOP controlled by the allies of Ronna McDaniel, the Republican National Committee chair, and Betsy DeVos, the former election secretary and a member of the billionaire family of GOP donors. Remember, in 2016, democracy failed. They were just making sure that democracy succeeded this time. I don't think I could have said it any better, George. On a call with his team on November 18th, Bassin, I'm just so used to thinking they're inventing things, right? Bassin vented that his side's pressure was no match for what Trump could offer. Of course, he's going to try to offer something. Head of the Space Force, ambassador to wherever. We can't compete with that by offering carrots. We need a stick. If Trump were to offer, they're literally talking about Trump bribing people. They're planning for Trump to bribe people. Okay. If Trump were to offer something in exchange for a personal favor, that would likely constitute bribery. He phoned Richard Primus, a law professor at University of Michigan, to see if Primus agreed and would make the argument publicly. Primus said that the meeting itself was inappropriate and got to work for an op-ed for Politico. Politico, of course, that bastion of nonpartisanship where their staff members cried about Ben Shapiro writing an article for 2 straight weeks. He wrote an op-ed for Politico, warning that the state attorney general, a Democrat, had no choice but to investigate. When the piece was posted on November 19th, the attorney general's communication director tweeted it. Protect Democracy soon got word that the Republican lawmakers planned to bring lawyers to that meeting with Trump the next day. Reyes activists scanned flight schedules and flocked to the airports on both ends of the Shirkey journey to D.C. to underscore the lawmakers were being scrutinized. After the meeting, the pair announced they pressured the president to deliver COVID relief for constituents and informed him that they saw no role in the election process. Then they went for a drink at the Trump Hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue. The street artists projected their images on the outside of the building, with the words, "The world is watching." If their only goal was a free and fair election, then why are they doing this massive pressure campaign? Why? The left left one last step. The state canvassing board made up of 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. One Republican's a Trumper, employed by the DeVos family political nonprofit, was not expected to vote for certification. The other Republican on the board was little-known lawyer Aaron Van Langveld. He said no singles about what he planned to do, leaving everyone on edge. When the meeting began, Reyes activists flooded the live stream, filled Twitter with their hashtag, "All Eyes on Michigan." A board accustomed to attendance in the single digits suddenly faced an audience of thousands. In hours of testimony, the activists emphasized their message of respecting voters' wishes and affirming democracy rather than scolding the officials. Van Langveld quickly signaled that he would follow precedent. The vote was 3-0 to certify. The other Republican abstained. After that, the dominoes fell. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and the rest of the states certified their electors too. Republican officials in Arizona and Georgia stood up to Trump's bullying, and the Electoral College vote was scheduled for December 14th. How close we came. There was one last milestone of Podhorser's mind, January 6th. On the day Congress would meet to tally the electoral count, Trump summoned his supporters to D.C. for a rally. Much to their surprise, the thousands who answered the call were met by virtually no counter demonstrators. To preserve safety and ensure they couldn't get blamed for the mayhem, the activist left was strenuously disencouraging counter activity. Podhoser texted me on the morning of January 6th with a crossed fingered emoji. They literally planned this, guys. They planned every little bit of this. Trump addressed the crowd that afternoon, peddling the lie that lawmakers told Vice President Mike Pence to reject states' electoral votes. He told them to go to the Capitol and fight like hell. He also said peacefully, Time magazine. Peacefully. He said peacefully. Literally said peacefully. Left that part out. When he returned to the White House, they sacked the building. Are you kidding me? As lawmakers fled for their lives, and his very own supporters were shot and trampled, Trump praised the rioters as very special. These people are insane. It was his final attack on democracy, and once again it failed. By standing down, the democracy campaigners outfoxed their foes. We won by the skin of our teeth. Honestly, it's the most important point for people to sit with, says the Democracy Defense Coalition's people. There's an impulse for some to say voters decided and democracy won, but it's a mistake to think that this election cycle was a show of strength for democracy. It shows how vulnerable democracy is. You're absolutely right. It does show how vulnerable democracy is. You are 100% correct. You literally have showed in this article how vulnerable democracy is. Thank you. The members of the Alliance to Protect the Election have gone their separate ways. The Democracy Defense Coalition has been disbanded, though the fight back table lives on. Protect Democracy and the good government advocates have turned their attention to pressing reforms in Congress. Left-wing activists are pressured to the newly empowered Democrats to remember the voters who put them there, while civil rights groups are on guard against further attacks. Business leaders denounce the January 6th attack, and some say they will no longer donate to Republicans who refuse to certify Biden's victory. Because that's the victory you really cared about all along, wasn't it? It wasn't about free and fair elections. It was Biden's victory. Podhoser and his allies are still holding Zoom strategy sessions, gauging voters' views and gauging Freudian slip. Gauging voters' views and developing new messages. And Trump is in Florida facing his second impeachment, deprived of his Twitter and Facebook accounts he used to push the nation to a breaking point. As I was reporting this article in November and December, I heard different claims about who should get credit for thwarting Trump's plot. Liberals argued the role of bottom up people power shouldn't be overlooked, particularly the contributions of people of color and local grassroots activists. Others stressed the heroism of GOP officials like Van Langveld and Georgia Secretary of State Brad Roethlisberger, who stood up to Trump's considerable cost. The truth is that neither likely could have succeeded without the other. It's astounding how close we came, how fragile this all really is, said Timmer, the former GOP chair. It's like when Wile E. Coyote runs off the cliff, and if you don't look down, you don't fall. Our democracy only survives if we all believe and don't look down. Democracy won in the end. The will of the people prevailed. But it's crazy, in retrospect, that this is what it took to put on an election in the United States of America. Wow. Wow. So, guys, I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to jet. You want to know why I rag on you for not focusing on stuff that matters? It's because they are. They're completely focused on things that matter. And that's why they won. So you have a choice every single moment of every single day. Are you going to focus on nonsense, or are you going to focus on things that matter? That's up to you. No one can do it for you. But they won because, well, many people were trusting the plan and believing that the Republicans had this all worked out and they had a secret strategy. They kicked all your asses. Our asses. I was on the team too. They kicked all our asses. Nuclear 1-2. Update on Adam's sweater. I do have a couple videos I need to release on Adam's sweater. I am a little over halfway done it. I know I'm slacking on releasing some videos. Maybe I'll do a little bit with that. But it's coming along very nicely. All right, guys. Again, I apologize if you showed up expecting to see a chat with the lefty. I tried. Scheduling didn't work out. Time zones were confused. I will reschedule it, and hopefully we will have the conversation soon. But I do hope you enjoyed this article. That's some crazy shit right there. I'll tell you that. All right, I'm gonna head off. I'm gonna head off and start enjoying my weekend. But I hope you all have a good weekend, and I'll see you soon. Bye.